the last SEA lecture of the year. I'll introduce you to Leesa in a moment, but before I do that, let me just acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we all join and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. For those of you who frequently come to these lectures, you know that they're recorded. If you have any concerns, please do share those with Remy, and please note them in the chat too. I'm really excited about today's talk. Leesa is known to many of you, and I'll introduce her in a moment, but I think her topic is very appropriate for us thinking about the future of education. How we support students outside of their comfort zone and facilitate their learning is just so important. And I think that there's nobody better to walk us through this than Leesa. Leesa is the Deputy Head of School for Education and a Senior Lecturer in Statistics in the School of Science at UNSW Canberra, and is known, I'm sure, to everybody. She's a former high school teacher and has extensive experience in developing and lecturing undergraduate and postgraduate courses, including science courses, service courses and compulsory statistics courses taken by arts and business students. That's a huge responsibility and something that we're all grateful for, because it's those students that are often outside their comfort zones. I think I'd like to highlight just a few things about Leesa before I pass over to her to introduce her topic. Leesa is an exceptional teacher. She's been acknowledged in the inaugural Australian Mathematical Society Award for Teaching Excellence in 2018. She's a UNSW Vice Chancellor's Award winner for 2017 and a UNSW Canberra Rector's Award winner for Teaching Excellence in 2015. Her topic, as I foreshadowed, is about supporting students who are outside of their comfort zone. And rather than make a mess of introducing Leesa's topic to you and having her then to unpick all of that and change it, what I'm going to do is hand over to Leesa now, and I'll facilitate some questions at the end. So please do pop them in the chat. We'll aim to finish somewhere around about 1/4 to the hour, and then we'll have a question and answer session. So Leesa, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Rawdon, and thanks everybody for joining us today in this last SEA lecture for the year. So I thought I'd start by just, let me just make sure this works. All right, thought I'd start by giving you a bit of background information about UNSW Canberra in case you're not aware of where we are and what we do. So UNSW Canberra has been at the Australian Defence Force Academy, or ADFA, since ADFA was established in 1986. And before that, it was at the Royal Military College at Duntroon. These figures are based like probably a year or two ago, but we have slightly over 1,000 undergraduate students, so we're relatively small, and we have more postgraduate coursework students, about 1,600 or so, and about 400 HDRs. Almost all of our undergraduate students are from defence, so the majority of them are trainee officers, mostly fresh out of high school, although Navy students spend a year in the Navy before they come to us. And we also have a small number of advanced students, so mature age students who have been in the military sometimes for 20 or 30 years before they come to us to study and become an officer. And these defence students come from all states and territories in Australia, but predominantly Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. And we have a small number from overseas as well, so from several overseas countries. Now, you might wonder why I chose a topic like this, being outside their comfort zone. Well, firstly, I think that in general, many of our students at UNSW Canberra are outside their comfort zone. Many of them are first in family students. They're the first in the family to attend university. And I don't have figures on this, but I've heard at various fora over the years that I think UNSW has a relatively high proportion of first in family students, and UNSW Canberra is probably the faculty with one of the highest rates of those. Most of our students are living away from home for the first time, so they leave their families, move away, and then most of them live in divisions on campus. So they're coming to terms with not only being a university student for the first time, but also being trainee officer in the Australian Defence Force. And as well as that, because they're coming from all different states and territories and they have different backgrounds, different education systems, although that's changing as we speak, it's sort of changing into the national curriculum. Their preparedness for, especially for maths-based courses, varies significantly depending on what state or territory they came from and what level of, say, maths that they did as well. So all of these factors, I guess, contribute to the fact that many of the students do feel a little bit out of their depth when they come to us to study. Now, For this slide, I'm feeling a bit out of my depth and a bit out of my comfort zone. I'd like to thank Jackie Cranny for this slide, and also Jackie for she's been a fantastic mentor for me over the last few years. Since I've been in the SEA, actually, since I've been in the Scientia Education Academy. Jackie and I have worked on several projects together, including an EF Community of Practice project, the first round of projects in 2017, and more recently a Healthy Universities initiative, which is an SEA initiative, and a student wellbeing curriculum project, which I'll tell you a little bit about at the end. So I'll try not to butcher this, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about self-determination theory before I get into the main part of my talk. So firstly, the idea is to create a learning supportive curriculum environment for all of my students, and in particular, those that are outside their comfort zone. So self-determination theory provides a research-supported theoretical framework for promoting student academic success and well-being. And it seeks to create this curriculum environment by supporting their psychological needs, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So as you can see on the screen, autonomy is about giving students choice within their learning and assessment activities, making links between what they're learning and careers and so on, helping them gain competence by scaffolding and giving them feedback, and relatedness, and that's to do with behaviours and interpersonal relationships between student and student, educator and student, and even between student and the school or student and the institution. So basically we want to develop all of these three at the same time. And so on the surface, academic success is mainly to do with competence or mastery, but research tells us that that well-being is increased when we deal with all of these psychological needs. And so that's basically what I'm aiming for in this talk. But I should mention that a lot of the things that I'm going to tell you about, I established without knowing about the self-determination theory. But once I learned from Jackie about this, then I could say, oh, okay, this is what I do, and that satisfies competence, or this satisfied relatedness. And so I found that a really useful framework to work with. So now I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about school or faculty-wide strategies that we use to support students, well, to support our students in general, and in particular those who are outside their comfort zone. So I'll tell you a little bit about first-year lunches, mentoring program, a student staff liaison committee, and academic support programs that we have in place. And once I've done that, I'll move on to a case study where I'll look at a particular course that I've been teaching for the last few years, where students are well outside their comfort zone, and some of the strategies I've used in that particular course. Okay, so starting with first year student lunch. We've done this in the School of Science, particularly for first year students in the last couple of years, but previously we've had lunches for all science students previously. Our other schools in the faculty also hold similar events. So the idea is we feed the students pizzas, we introduce key academic staff from within the school and also some key military staff. And what we also like to do is to bring along UNSW Canberra alumni guests. So we've got graduates of UNSW Canberra at ADFA, who in particular we deal with science graduates, who come along and talk to the students. One of the things they tell the students is how they've used the knowledge and skills from their degrees during their studies in their military careers. And some of the feedback that we've obtained from students have shown that it improves the student motivation and engagement and encourages them to focus more strongly on their academic studies. Some of our students are already focused on their academic studies, but some aren't, because some of them come because they want to be officer in the military, and so the degree is just a means to an end. And so, you know, there is an aspect of P's make degrees for some students, although not all, obviously. And so I think having these alumni guests helps them to see the relevance of their studies, and that even if they didn't come here specifically to study maths and chemistry, it will be useful for them in their future lives. Another thing that we've established just this year, actually, After advice from a staff member in the engineering and IT school from our faculty, they started a mentoring program. But one of the things they told me was, they had everybody mentoring students, but they didn't think it worked so well because the people weren't volunteers. And so we established this in the School of Science this year. And the idea was to support first-year science students in their transition to university studies. So I asked for volunteers amongst our academic staff, and the lovely bunch on the right in the photos here, 13 people volunteered to mentor groups of 4 to 6 students. So I think it's good to get volunteers because they're then people who are on board with the idea and who want to actually do a good job in mentoring students. So sorry, I have to move around. I think the lights have gone off. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so the mentoring program was launched in week 2, just before our classes all moved online due to COVID. So that was, we launched it at the welcome lunch that I spoke about a moment ago, and the welcome lunch included a getting to know you session for the mentor groups. The mentors were encouraged to meet students online several times during semester 1 and semester 2 to provide support and advice. And the mentors were also provided with a list of common issues faced by students and contact details for various services so that they could refer the students on to services, say the counsellor or student admin services, etc., if they needed to. Now, the next one I was going to talk about was Student Staff Liaison Committee, or SSLC. Now, every school at UNSW Canberra has an SSLC, and the idea of it is to provide students with the opportunity to communicate with staff on matters relating to course quality in particular, academic performance, well-being of their classmates, etc. Now, it consists of 1 or 2 student reps from every course that's taught by our school. So that's all the science courses as well as the service courses that we teach for the other schools. We have an academic staff member and a professional staff member, thanks Tori, for organise the meetings and take notes on issues raised. So we run these meetings early in the semester, week 3 or 4, and then again later in week 9 or 10, keeping in mind that we have 13, 14-week semesters at UNSW Canberra. So the reason we run them twice is so that we can just see how things are going early on in the semester so that we can nip in the bud any problems that might be arising, and then we check on how things are going later in the semester as well. Now, the student reps provide feedback on lots of things to do with their courses, pace of the lectures, quality of the teaching materials, the standard of the assessment, etc. They're pretty candid, and they give us really good feedback, actually. We're very grateful to our students for taking on this role. Some of the list of, at the end of the meeting, we come up with a list of potential action items as well as general student feedback, and that's passed on to all of our teaching staff via the discipline coordinators. So that means that the staff can implement student suggestions immediately in real time rather than having to wait until they get feedback from my experience surveys and then change it for the following cohort. So we find this really useful in that way. In this year in particular, we've made sure that we then write up school responses to the action items and pass them back to the Student Staff Liaison Committee student reps so that we close the loop, just like we do in the My Experience surveys as well, and let students know that their voices have been heard and we are actually listening to them. So, I mean, I won't go through the details here, but the student staff, I should have gone back to the program. You probably see that some of the things that this is satisfying. It's helping students to feel like they're related, the sense of belonging. Also the first one as well, the first year lunch, a sense of belonging. It's also, to a certain extent, it's looking at the autonomy, satisfying the autonomy need by making links between what they're studying and their future careers, and perhaps competence as well to a certain degree. Mentoring program as well, relatedness, the relationship between the student and the staff member, And in some cases, it'll also be helping develop their competence as well, their academic competence. And similarly for the Student Staff Liaison Committee meeting. Academic support programs, we have a fantastic learning and teaching group at UNSW Canberra, and this includes also the Academic Language and Learning Unit. And these groups run testing before the students commence their academic program. So it's in YOFT, Year 1 familiarisation training for the students. So the students complete an English test, a maths test. There's 2 different levels depending on whether they're doing a maths engineering degree or if they're doing, say, arts or business. And for those who are doing physics, they have a physics benchmarking test as well. So this is to identify which students require assistance. And at that point, then we can offer them assistance and put them in support programs where they can get specialised help from for example, from the physics and the maths physics support coordinator group. So that again, that's helping them. I mean, it's sort of helping them, giving them a point of contact where they can get help directly. And again, it's working on building their competence. Next, I'm going to move on to a case study. So curriculum support strategies that I use in a compulsory data analysis course that I teach for arts and business students. And the course is called Fundamentals of Data Analysis, so FDA for short. You may notice that already I've mentioned several acronyms, and perhaps we're hanging around defence people too much because acronyms are rife in defence, I think. So you may wonder why we teach data analysis to arts and business students. And I guess one of the reasons is that our rector and Defence were quite keen for our UNSW Canberra graduates to all have basic quantitative proficiency. For example, the former Director of Education and Training at ADFA, Captain Jenny Dates, she stated that Defence needs not just STEM graduates, but also STEM savvy humanities and social science graduates in its workforce. So this course FDA was devised to give key quantitative methods to all of our students. It was offered for the first time in 2014, just for business students, and then from 2015 onwards for all students who weren't doing other maths courses through science or engineering. So some of the background about this course, just so that you know what it's about. We've got, I mean, it's big by our standards, but small by your standards at Kensington. We have all arts and business students complete this course, so it's a compulsory course for them. And at this stage, we've had between 150 to 170 students. Next year, we're expecting 200 because we're adding Bachelor of Computing and Cybersecurity students as well. We have 4 contact hours per week, so just a 2-hour lecture and a 2-hour computer lab. Up to this point, the computer labs have been in computer rooms, but from 2021 onwards, they'll just be bringing their own device. We have generally about 30 plus students in each lab and 2 or 3 tutors. The course teaches things like sampling, surveys, experiments, basic statistical techniques, and it also encourages students to be more critical of results they hear in studies reported by the media, etc. We focus on understanding concepts of statistics, but without overemphasizing the mathematical detail. So we try to emphasize, use of real life scenarios. We do some things by hand, but we also use computer software. And I really try to avoid a black box approach and try to get them to encourage them to understand the material by doing some of the things by hand if appropriate before actually using the computer packages. I use my non-statistics textbook by my first statistics lecturer, Helen McGilvray from University of Queensland, and we use Excel software because all students have it. They'll have it after they leave uni as well, and it's used widely in the military. So it's not ideal, but it does the job. Now, some of the main issues that we have in fundamentals of data analysis is quite a few students they've got a huge range of maths abilities, and quite a few of them are really scared of maths. I call them maths phobes. So a lot of them are really outside their comfort zone and don't want to be there. So I had one student who said to me he has a maths ability of a panda, which was quite funny. And you can see some of the other student comments that people have made below. So there's quite a few students, especially some of the mature age students who've been away from school for 20 years. And when they were at school, they struggled with maths from the beginning. So some of them are quite scared of having to do this course, but they succeed and do fine. Okay, and some students are quite angry that they're forced to do the course, and they think it's unfair that their WAM may be negatively affected. So here's some actual student comments. I think that the highly negative comments have reduced over the years as students have discovered by word of mouth from their colleagues that it's not that bad, and the WAM difference tends to be slightly positive. So they don't. I mean, although some students will do worse than normal, the majority of them don't, and some of them actually do better than they do in some of their other courses. So some of the curricular support strategies that we use, and you'll see that there's a mixture of, and I'll leave homework for you to try to work out which ones satisfy autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Okay, but some of the things that I use in this course and in all of my courses, I suppose, getting to know student names. Now, obviously, that's not possible if you've got a really large course. It's not even possible for me to know all 200 of the students, but I can get to know quite a large number of them by attending the labs and talking to them and getting to know them a little bit. So I think that really appeals to students. And every year, every course that I teach, there's always several comments from students to say she got to know our names. Basically she cared enough to get to know us. So that really appeals to students. So I'd highly recommend that. Answering all questions thoroughly and patiently is really important. Never saying things like you should already know that, even when they should already know that. Don't say it. I'd suggest being sensitive and encouraging students who are anxious and find maths difficult, I think, is really important. Supporting them and providing moral support is really important. So yeah, the content's important, but all these other aspects are important as well. Ensuring that students experience success. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. That's important because for some of these students, they've never had success in maths in their entire lives. Some of them have struggled with maths, as I said before, from the very beginning of primary school. They identified themselves as somebody who can't do maths. And so it's really important to support those students adequately. And making the course interesting, showing real life applications, bringing in guest speakers to motivate students, I think that's important as well. Along the same lines, being accepting of students who don't have much maths knowledge. Students are offered some assistance based on the pre-test that I mentioned at the beginning. Meeting the students at their level and bringing them up to the level that they need to be at, I think, is important. But at the same time, avoiding being condescending and talking down to students because they really don't like that either. And just because they know, if I say, okay, what do you know? We're doing linear regression. Do you know what the equation of the straight line is? People will say y equals mx plus c. And some of the students will know what that means, and they'll even be able to tell you what m means and what c stands for, but a lot of them don't, or they know the words, but they don't really understand it. So going back to the beginning and just explaining the conceptual ideas I think is really important. So that's all about scaffolding, building the competence. Providing lots of resources on the learning management system, being responsive to their needs if they're struggling with any particular area. I love Camtasia. I've been using Camtasia videos for years and the students really find those useful. I find it also very useful to keep my finger on the pulse. The Student Staff Liaison Committee does that for the school as a whole, but for me as a teacher of a particular course, attending all the labs when possible, I find really useful because I can get an idea of how they're going, whether everything's going okay, and make adjustments to the course if needed. You can really get an idea of what the course morale is like as well, much more easily than just in the lectures. Providing one-on-one assistance is fantastic. I love the fact that at labs I can just help people one-on-one or two-on-one or whatever. I found that a lot more difficult online last semester. Organising additional support classes, student really respond to as well. It doesn't take much of my time, especially when if I can do them online. Having a Teams group, a Teams chat, finding a time where people who need help are available, and meeting them for half an hour, it's no problem, but they really appreciate it. They also, I think, appreciate being contacted personally. So I try to contact at-risk students, usually identified through the assessment. So the students who I can see are struggling, I try to contact them and encourage them to attend support classes and get additional assistance if they need it. So another strategy that I used in this particular course was the way I developed lab assessment. And the problem was we were having these computer labs where the students had to go through a lab sheet. Some of it was done by hand, some of it is using Excel. They worked through the lab sheet, and I wanted to avoid just assigning participation marks, which I don't think are much used in this particular case. I also wanted to avoid having them to submit lab reports, which we used to do in a business data analysis course, because that's really time consuming for them and for the marker as well. So I wanted to try to find a method of assessment that encouraged them to stay on task, engage them, get them to engage with the material, and also provide them with immediate feedback. So the solution was I actually talked to my physics colleagues in the School of Science, and some of them had been using a checkpoint method of assessment for their physics labs. I think they were no longer using it at that point, but they were using that early on, and I thought that it was probably possible for me to adapt that to use for this purpose. So I devised lab sheets with explicit instructions leading them through the theory and teaching them to apply the theory to the data. The data was all stored in Excel worksheets, and it was arising from real life type scenarios. They did some things by hand if appropriate, and they also used Excel. And they had access to not just the lab sheets, but also the solutions and full solutions on the learning management system as well. So for any urgent issues, students sought assistance immediately. And students were encouraged to keep note of less urgent questions so they could ask when a tutor became available. So we have 2 or 3 tutors in the room, so that at 2 points during the lab, 2-hour lab, when the student comes to the checkpoint symbol that you can see on the screen here, when they get to the checkpoint symbol, which you also see just on the right-hand side, at 2 points during the lab, they check their solutions with the solutions that are provided to them, compare their answers to the solutions, and then they call over a tutor to check their work. And the tutor usually checks their understanding, makes sure they're on the right track, checks to see if they have any other questions. And if the students completed it satisfactorily, the tutor will just tick them off and they've got the 1 checkpoint. So by the end of the 2 hours, they will have either got 0 checkpoints if they didn't attend, or 1 or 2. It's a very supportive environment. Students who make a mistake have the opportunity to correct it and get it marked off later. So it's no big deal to make a mistake. If they've got anything wrong, they get some clarification on it, they go back and fix it up, and they put their hand up later and get ticked off. Almost everyone completes the lab within the 2-hour period. There's an occasional student who's really meticulous and who takes longer than that. That's fine. They can just finish it off in their own time and bring it back next week. If students are absent from the lab due to illness, they can catch up on the lab in their own time and get ticked off. So the labs are worth 10%, so it's not a huge amount. So there's really no problem with them getting 9% or 10%, but I think it really motivates them to actually complete the work and engage with the material. There's a small number of students who are keen to complete the work as soon as possible and just run out the door, but the majority of them actually go through it seriously and I think do try to make the most of the opportunity that's given to them. So some of the benefits that I see of the lab assessment is that it encourages students to engage with the material and stay on task. And I'll let you read the student comments that are written there on the screen. I think the labs also provide immediate feedback and improve learning. And again, I'll let you read the comments. So again, this is like to do with autonomy to a certain extent because it's reasonably self-paced. It's competence, we're scaffolding their learning and providing lots of feedback. And they're also often working they can work alone if they wish, they can work in pairs or in threes. And there's a lot of interaction between the students and also between the students and the tutors. And some of the other benefits are that it provides a supportive learning environment and increases motivation. And again, I'll let you read the student comments. And here's some overall comments that students have made about labs. And I think this was last year, I think, 94% of the students agreed that the lab sessions were a valuable part of the course. So some of the other curriculum support strategies that we either use or intend to use, I've had several guest artists come in and speak to the students. Often they've been past students who've done the course and who found it useful when they've gone out into their military careers. I've also had the Captain Jenny Dates, who's the former Director of Education and Training at ADFA several years ago, who was, I think, the DET when this course was devised. She's talked to the students, and she's also let us record a video of her explaining why she thinks it's a relevant course for them to do. The other thing that I'm planning to do, following hearing about it at the EF retreat and also at our Learning and Teaching Day from one of my colleagues, Gavin Mount, was to use VoiceThread to allow students to introduce themselves, to try to help build the learning community more. I'd also like to use a self-care Moodle forum, so an additional Moodle forum that's not based on the content. And that, I think, was an idea from Jenny Richmond, one of our UNSW colleagues. So Jenny sets up a separate forum and just says, these are a few things, especially during COVID, these are a few things that I've done this week to take care of myself, and ask students to post things as well. Another thing I'd like to do that I started last year but didn't sort of continue this year with COVID, set up a survey to collect data from students so that they can analyse data from their own cohort in lectures and labs. And the idea is to increase ownership and make it more interesting, basically, and make it a little bit more self-directed, I suppose. So again, the take-home message, I suppose, and I might just flip across to the self-determination theory again. All of us are caring teachers who already use a wide range of strategies to support our students, and sometimes we do it just because we know it works. But it is useful to have a framework such as self-determination theory to hang these strategies on. So I just remind you, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And this framework can help us determine whether our course is lacking any of the main psychological needs. So, for example, if we think we're lacking autonomy, we haven't given the students enough choice with their learning, we haven't made links between the course material and big ideas, then what we can do is adjust aspects of our course so the students feel better supported, leading to improved student wellbeing. And finally, just a plug for our student wellbeing COP. That's run by Gavin Mount and Namani, who's recently won a VC award. Well done, Namani. And the student wellbeing COP, several of us from that group who are EF staff applied through Louise, and we're thankful to Louise and her group for supporting us in this, to use our career development funding to run a curriculum project. And what we've been doing is meeting regularly, discussing some of the strategies that we've used to support students' wellbeing, and our project officers, Pip and Gayani, have been working with us to evaluate those. So we're going to be evaluating the strategies that we've used. Okay, I'll stop there and grab a drink of water. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Leesa, that was terrific. Thank you very much. Colleagues, please have your questions primed. Leesa, if you don't mind, I'm going to abuse my position of chair and ask you a question.
Sure.
So those maths phobic students, we have all encountered them. what are your sense of how they respond after having done your module? Do any of them take a better turn to statistics? Do you excite an interest in them? I'm sure you do. And do you then see them flourish in more mathematically based subjects?
Well, these particular students, I don't see them later. I see them around the campus, but I don't see them in our later courses because they're doing arts and business and they don't do more maths courses. But I must say that I'm thinking of, there's one person who really stands out who was probably in her 40s, who had been struggling with maths for her whole life. She saw me before the course started and said, look, I think I'm going to need a tutor. And she was obviously very concerned with it, but she found that she was actually much more capable than she gave herself credit for. She even at one stage brought in her year 9 maths report, her report card, and showed me the comment by her year 9 maths teacher. And basically it was really said, oh, I only wish I could show the maths teacher what I've been able to do in this course. So that was one of the things that really stood out for me. It was really gratifying because she realized that she always had it in her. She lacked confidence. She may have had, that she was better at, humanities than maths and science, but she was capable, and she only realized she was capable after doing this course. And so there's been several students like that, and so they really stand out.
Absolutely. That confidence piece and giving them confidence to be confident, I think, is really important. Colleagues, can I invite you to ask Leesa questions, please?
Okay, I see we can always rely on Gary to put up a funny GIF for us. Thanks, Gary, for your panda GIF. So Gary's advised us we shouldn't pander to students.
Yes. So Leesa, Lily asks, how many times have you spent on, I presume it's how much time have you spent on filling in the gaps?
I usually go from like linear regression, say. I usually assume that quite a large proportion of the class don't really understand it. And so I give just the very basics, but I normally fill in the gaps routinely, but not try to dwell on it too much because I don't want to talk down to the students. And there's some students who are very competent. There's some students who are really good at maths, but they've done arts because they chose to and because they preferred to the humanities and so on. So I guess the filling in the gaps is routine, but how long I do it for, usually it's brief. For some areas, it's got to be longer. And often the filling in the gaps can happen during labs as well. So, if necessary, I grab people and pull them aside and fill in the gaps with them in a group in labs. And so it's much easier for them to ask questions, and if they don't understand it, to ask further in those sort of circumstances.
Thanks, Leesa. I'm going to ask you another question, if you don't mind. So you talked about this a bit, but perhaps you could elaborate a bit more. When you're finding ways to connect with students to help them with their mathematics, you obviously have to stretch to find areas of common ground that you think that they have, whether it's in an arts or business. Tell us a bit about that. I mean, that must challenge you as well.
We've often, actually, all of my colleagues, and I know in maths, and our colleagues and I have often tried to use defence examples, and I think that probably appeals to some of the students, but some of them say, not defence examples again. Sometimes we just go back to things like breakfast cereal. Who secretly likes Cocoa Pops? So we can get data from Coles website on breakfast cereal, the dietary fiber content or energy or whatever. And so that's a common ground. As humans, we all have to eat. We mostly eat, a lot of us eat breakfast cereal. So it doesn't have to be necessarily something that's relevant to their studies. It can be just sort of a more general thing. The examples that I have, the textbook that I use is a lot of Australian, New Zealand examples, which I find good. And there's a wide variety of examples which I think tend to appeal to many of the students.
Thank you, Leesa. Ross, you have your mic on. Please ask your question.
Thank you, Leesa. Fabulous presentation. I teach history in HASS, and I've got a question about the link between course materials and the big ideas, as it were. This is one of the things we find really challenging to develop, and I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on how you deal with that.
Well, I think a lot of what we do in this course is more just things that they read in the media, and I mean they'll hear about studies that have been done, and until they've considered some of the issues involved in running these studies, they just tend to, I think, take things at face value and just believe them. And so I think one of the things that I encourage them, and I think this is relevant for art students in their future careers, whatever they're doing, is to be a bit more critical of things and ask questions and just be aware that you know, if you're doing a radio poll survey and it's only, you know, various types of listeners who are responding, or even with my experience surveys, you know, if you're getting a very small number of people responding, who's more likely to respond? Okay, you'll get a small number of the really conscientious ones who just do the right thing all the time.
Yeah.
And you'll get the ones who are have got a problem and who have got an axe to grind and they want to give negative comments. So, you know, even little things like that, I think, are relevant to them in their general lives. I'm not sure if that's really answered your question, Ross, but yeah, did you want to ask any further?
Okay, perhaps if I gave you a specific example. Look, what you've said is very good about encouraging students to be critical and to ask questions. I absolutely agree. Let me give you a specific. One of the things we do is look at the reasons in the first year World War II course, the reasons why countries went to, but actually weren't going to succeed. And so we look at things like access to fuel, access to raw materials, the amount of money they had. And as an exercise, we asked students to put this information into a sheet. So there was fuel supply, maritime trade, and so on. And then across, there were rows for each country. And we asked them to look at some of the relationships. They found that really hard to do. Although they could put the information in, they knew the data, as it were.
Yeah.
Detecting.
Is this a first year course, by the way?
Yeah. Yes.
They don't actually do this course until the art students do it in second or third year, actually. But I would be very happy to talk to you offline, Ross, and be happy to get some data from you and use it in an example in the course if you're happy with that.
Sure.
So please contact me.
Thank you, Leesa.
Yeah. Thanks, Ross.
Leesa, I'm going to be a bit playful with your title and the way you introduce this, if you don't mind, because I think there's something really interesting here. How do you continue to support students to go outside of their comfort zone? Because clearly being outside of their comfort zone is very important in their learning journey. And it's really important that we recognise when students are outside of their comfort zone in ways that we may have been unsensitive to in the past. But how do we continue to support them and for them to continue to go outside of their comfort zone?
I think by challenging students, I mean, there's two aspects here. We want to support them and to start at the level they're at, but we also want to give them things to challenge them. And I mean, some of the material that I do in this course, for example, is quite challenging for them. And so I think by challenging them, so that it's sort of a bit beyond them, but by giving them a supportive environment so that they have the confidence that they can make mistakes, that they can have a go without being criticised. I think that's really important. So I think that's the way you can get the students from this level up to the level that you want them to be at, by just stretching them and helping them to jump that little bit higher, but supporting them and scaffolding their learning. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Thank you. Colleagues, any more questions? Leesa, I see no hands coming up or colleagues unmiking themselves. So I think we might move to a close. Was there anything you'd like to say before we move to a close?
No, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming today, and thanks to Remy for organising it and being so patient with all your organisation. And thanks, Rawdon, for coming in and being present today.
Oh, Leesa, look, it was a treat, genuine treat. I think you can see colleagues saying exactly the same thing in the chat. I think it's a really fitting way to end what's been a challenging year, actually. And I think the support that we've all given students, or you've all given students this year, has just been outstanding. Thanks, Leesa, for sharing that with us. Thanks, colleagues, for coming along today, for all your commitment this year. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this academic year, have a restful holiday, and see you all next year.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.